Carlos, really glad to have you here on the show. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about your background?
Yeah, hey Brian, always a pleasure to talk to you. I have been in B2B marketing and sales for over 20 years. I think right now it's about 25 years, which is hard to believe. So I've been both client side, and then in 2005, I co-founded an agency, and that agency is still running, but left that agency at the end of 2016, beginning of 2017, to start another business. So could say I'm a bit of an entrepreneur. I love creating things. And so now I work with B2B companies in the whole area of customer experience under the new brand VisumCX, and then just wrote my second book. First book was on demand generation, so if you ever have insomnia, go for it. You can read that. But this book was the UnAmerican Dream, which is more my story and a whole lot more personal than the first one.
Can you tell the story about why you wrote this book, The Un-American Dream, and why now?
Yeah, great question. When I left Annuitas, which was the first company that I had co-founded and started, I put a post on LinkedIn about why I was leaving. And it was more to get back to what I should have been doing in the first place, which was cultivating those meaningful relationships, especially with my children and my marriage. And I was struck by the number of calls and emails I got from fellow entrepreneurs and fellow business leaders who were saying, so how did you do this? Like, what steps did you take? Because I'm at my wit's end. I've never seen my family, or my marriage is falling apart, or, insert whatever they were going through.
Right.
And I was really surprised, like, wow, this is not just me going through this. So that's the why. But the why now is the idea of that book came to me over those, 2 years. It was over 2 years ago. But I needed to work on me first. I had to get some things straight in me. And one of those things, and I start with the introduction, I believe saying I first had the idea in 2016. And when I told somebody the title, they said, it sounds like an angry book. And I believe if I had written it then, it would have been an angry book, because I had a lot of things that I had to work through and deconstruct some things that I had held to be true, which weren't true. So I needed to wait. And so waiting, I believe, made it a much more authentic book, a much more vulnerable book, but not an angry book in any way.
So as I was listening to you, and I'm going to ask the same question you got asked by many people on LinkedIn, how did you walk away from this Un-American Dream? And what do you mean by that?
Yeah, wow. How I did it, it wasn't, from the outside, it probably seemed like, oh, he woke up one day and was like, I'm done. It was a 10-month process for me. I really, really wrestled with the decision. And Brian, you've started businesses, you're an entrepreneur yourself. And when you start something from scratch and you put everything you have into it, you really, the term I hear often is this is my baby. And I wanted to make sure that, first and foremost, I'd come to a place where I'm like, I've got to do everything I can to get back those relationships that I had neglected for so long. And so I tried to do that within the context of the first business. And that took me 10 months. And I kept wrestling with what should I do and how should I do it? And it was a conversation, which I've told many times, so I won't elaborate in case there's overlap with people who've heard this before, but a conversation with a colleague in the lobby of the Westin who encouraged me. He said, you know what you need to do, you just need the courage to do it. Mm. And I called Suzanne, my wife, at that point, a few hours later, and said, I'm leaving. So I really, when it came down to it, I really just pulled the ripcord, because I didn't have a big buyout waiting. I didn't have this big hoard of cash in a savings account where I could run for months and months and months. It was a risk. It was scary. It was like, okay, so what am I going to do now? But everything panned out and everything worked out. But it was the best. I would do it again in a heartbeat. It was the best professional decision I ever made.
Well, Carlos, for our listeners, they'll come through. You and I are good friends, and I was just thinking about you as an entrepreneur, and as I know you, and I mean, entrepreneurships in your blood. You know, it's part of your history, part of your family history. And as I was reading the book, you wrote about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so, what's getting in the way of that?
Wow, so much is getting in the way of that. I think first and foremost is we as Americans are on this treadmill and this pace, and we have made work our God. And we work more than any other group, any other nationality in the world. So just think about that. I just read a stat last week where 32% of Gen X, or I'm sorry, millennials, will not take more than a 4-night vacation because of work. Wow. 70% of the population say, I don't have work-life balance. I was in Nashville this last weekend, and the people we stayed with, he's like, I didn't take all my vacation. I can't. And so I think part of what's getting into our happiness is we're slaves to our jobs, we're slaves to our career, we're slaves to our businesses, and that's a choice that we have made. And I know people will debate me on that all day long, but it is a choice that we have made. I literally, before this, saw a LinkedIn post that said, if you're reading this on the weekend, it's clear that you're a top performer. So the message there is, if you're not connected to your profession on the weekend, you're not a top performer, which is a total fallacy, because I don't work weekends anymore. I used to all the time. I don't any longer, which means I'm not on LinkedIn. I'm not promoting anything. I'm not doing anything for my clients. And everybody knows that. But that's a boundary I've chose. So I think that's one thing. The other thing that I think that's really getting in the way of our happiness is social media and these stinking things. And we are so attached to, and I will use the word addiction, to our devices and to social media, to the point where we'll put something on Facebook and then 20 minutes later we're going saying, how many likes? We retweet, how many followers do I have? And we have created what I call social loneliness, where we are so socially connected, but we are so utterly lonely because people don't really know us. We haven't built a relationship. Mm-hmm. And as human beings, we're wired for relationship. So I think when we put those things ahead of what we're wired for, our happiness, or our ability to choose happiness, severely wanes.
There's so much there, Carlos, as I'm listening to you, and you talked about this setting boundaries instead of trying to get work-life balance. And why is that?
Well, I don't believe in work-life balance, because I tried it in parts of my career, I tried it. Other parts, I was like, I'm completely unbalanced and I'm good with that, which when I say that makes me want to shake my head. But the stats will show you 70% saying I can't achieve work-life balance. So when I see that, I say, the reality is it doesn't exist. And the picture I get is my daughter, who was a gymnast for 14 years, up on that balance beam, and nothing made me more nervous. I had kids in theater and kids in sports, and they could perform, and I'd get a little nervous. But man, when she was there, and you think about that, it's hard to balance. Especially, it's hard to balance in across the trajectory of time. And so what I did is I rejected the idea of balance. And maybe it's semantics, but for me, the idea of boundaries is they're more permanent. If I draw a boundary or install a boundary, mm-hmm. it takes work to move.
Right.
And so I've adopted boundaries. And when I say I have, we have, because I've done it in community, first and foremost with my wife. Brian, you and I have talked about my boundaries, and I've invited you into that community of people who have permission to be like, hey, I'm kind of seeing this stuff, or, what's going on here? And how are you doing with that? And because God forbid if I'm the only one who's going to determine am I balanced.
Right.
And so what we did is we defined, what is it we want to protect? What do we want to value? And so for me, time with my family, time with my wife is priority number one. My health, both physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual, is really, really important. So I go to the gym regularly. I meditate. I take time to just stop and think and shut off my phone and close my computer. And some days it's just staring out the window. And if you were to look at me, you'd be like, is this guy really working or what? But I'm thinking. So it's those types of things that I protect. And so I have, and the counter to that is I'm so much wildly more productive in my work because there is a boundary around the time that I'm working. So I'm not engaging in friendly conversation or texting or meeting a buddy for lunch. I am absolutely focused in on what I'm doing for a living. And so my clients get the best of me as well as my relationship.
For those out there who are seeing this, it's not easy to do. So, or at least for me, it isn't. Do you have any tips, any advice on what you found we can do to get better at setting boundaries for non-negotiables in our life?
Yeah, well, you're right. It's not easy to do. And I'm the first to say, I don't have this all figured out. So I'm on the journey with everybody else. I may be a few steps ahead, but I also know people who are so much far ahead than I am. It's something I've been doing for 2 years. And so I shared with Suzanne the other day, I hate when people say, well, they've really done their work. Like we've all arrived. We should all be experiencing. And 3 weeks ago, I picked up my phone at, went and checked my email at 8:00 at night. And Suzanne's like, so what are we doing? Because this is 2 nights in a row. And it was completely appropriate, total gentle, not any kind of like, but that's what I wanted. So anyway, back to the question. I think first and foremost, you have to do it in community with your closeness of relationship. So if that's a spouse, if that's a boyfriend, girlfriend, close friend, close coworker, even your boss, right? And say, I want to give the best of myself in all aspects of my life, professionally, personally, whatever else, whether it's solitary work, if you're going to the gym by yourself, I want to give the best when I'm there. So do that in community and then sit down and really write down, what do you value? I was talking to somebody the other day who was talking to me how much they value their physical fitness. And then literally almost in the same breath, was like, well, I don't have time to go to the gym. Okay, so you don't really value your physical fitness. And when I say the gym, even go for a run outside. Because if you're shunning that, or if you're shunning the annual checkup or whatever that is, you don't value, you may say you do, but your actions say you don't. So really define what your value and then say, what are the things that I'm letting get in the way of those things that I say I value? And when you do that in community, you're going to get a much different perspective than if we just do it in isolation. Because oftentimes the people we surround ourselves with, that we are close with, can kind of point out our blind spots, which is of huge value to us and should be embraced. So I would say those are a couple of things that I would highly recommend.
That's really good. And I can identify with the blind spots and the need to have a feedback loop. And so there's things every person has that we can't see, in how we're living our life or how we're showing up. And, we won't know unless we ask people, what do you see that I'm missing? But it starts with having, it sounds like to get to that place, you got to have an intention or purpose too. And so how would someone start the conversation about this?
I think it's starting with being really honest, first and foremost, about here's where I'm at. And what I'm very clear in the book to say is, I'm not here to judge people who are going to work 14 hours a day. If that's what you and your community have decided is good and works for everybody, who am I to say you're wrong? I'm not, that's not my place. So I think just asking the question, how are we doing? Asking the question, hey, here's what I want to be doing. So I value family time. I value fitness. I value, fun, which can be a value. It may be something you value. So what do you see that I'm doing that's getting me in the way of that? Now, if you're going to ask that question, be prepared for the answers. And so part of the work I had to do was to sit down and hear some things that were pretty unpleasant. I didn't want to hear about things I had done, choices I had made, decisions I had made. And that is not a fun thing to go through, but it makes us better and it makes us more aware. So I am so much more aware now, even more so than I was even just a year ago, of when I'm in my personal boundary after working hours of not checking my phone, not trying to stay engaged, not returning that text. And I've gone to this extent to make my partners and my clients and my professional connections aware of that. So oftentimes if I do get a text at 10 o'clock at night or 9 o'clock at night, what I'm starting to see is, hey, I know you're not going to get this till the morning. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. And even if I see it, I'm not going to respond to it.
So I was thinking about the LinkedIn post you brought up about, hey, if you're looking at this on the Saturday, and, there's this whole notion of work devotion or hustle porn. So why is that such a thing today? And why is it destructive?
Well, I think that the reason it's a thing today is you've got so many loud voices out there promoting it. You've got Kevin O'Leary who's talking, literally says 25 hours a day. And in the interview that I think I quote in the book is, it's 24/7, get used to it and get over it. You've got Jack Ma with his ridiculous 966, 996, 9 to 9, 6 days a week. You've got Grant Cardone with his unhealthy approach to 95 hours a week. And the list goes on, Damon John's rise and grind, it's such like we're not real entrepreneurs unless we do this. So I think those voices are so loud, and it's this idea. I couple that with, if I'm the scarce resource to my organization, which means I'm working long hours, I'm always available, we make that part of our identity. It is a perfect storm. And so the reason it is destructive is we only have a certain amount of time each and every day, right? 24 hours a day, 86,400 seconds. If I'm devoting the majority of that time to my work, something has to suffer. Either I suffer, which if I do, I can't give the best of myself to my relationships. Mm-hmm. So either way, my relationships take a hit. And when I go back to fundamentally as human beings, we were wired for relationship. Then we have to start to think about, so what does that mean? And so when we start to move against what we're wired for fundamentally, we start to see anxiety, we start to see anger, we start to see sleeplessness, we start to see loneliness. And I was doing research on that this morning. It is off the charts. Over half of Americans are saying they have feelings of loneliness, even though we're so connected. And so just like all porn, hustle porn is destructive. It's toxic. I agree with Alex Ohanian. I applaud him for taking a stand against it. And honestly, I would be delighted to have the individuals that I just named just shut up, because they are doing a disservice to entrepreneurs and business leaders and families everywhere. And that's why I had Suzanne write a chapter, because on the other side, there is a story on the other side of every hustle story. And I lived that hustle lifestyle for far too long. It's not sustainable. And it did damage to us as a family and to me personally.
Well, I really appreciate you just, sharing that there is another side to this. And, as you mentioned, there's entrepreneurs, and you and I both have worked in the sales and marketing world for a long time. Is this happening in sales and marketing? And how can we, if so, what can we do to change it?
Yeah, it is. I work with marketers on a day-to-day basis. And I'm seeing more and more when you say, so how's it going? They're like, oh my word, I'm slammed. I'm overwhelmed. I have so much to do. There's not enough hours in the day. I get emails from clients at 10 o'clock at night. I got a text from a client not long ago, said, I feel completely overwhelmed and I'm so down. I don't know what to do. And so this isn't, I go to conferences where one of the questions I asked, last conference I was at, a bunch of marketers, how many of you feel there's not enough time to accomplish what you want to do in a meaningful way? Virtually every hand out of 200 plus went up. So I am definitely seeing this in the marketing and sales front. I think what we can do about it is, first of all, business leaders, if you're listening, start to create a culture that gives your people permission to turn off. When you are sending them emails at 10 o'clock at night, even if you've quote unquote said, hey, we have a culture where we have our working hours, you're putting them in a position of, can I tell the boss to wait? And that is a disadvantage you're giving to your people. If you really want the best of them, you will allow them time to step away and turn off and not feel they have to shorten their vacations or be connected on vacation or connected at 9 o'clock at night. So that's number one as a business leader. Number two, there's a corporate profile in the book of a lady named Claire Potter who is in a sales role. Mm-hmm. And Claire works for a multi-billion-dollar organization. And what she did was, hey, I just had my first child. I travel, my husband travels. That's not sustainable. I'm going to create a new job role in my organization. And at the same time, I'm going to create a plan B. So I'm going to start to talk to recruiters and understand what jobs are available that would now suit my lifestyle. And then she went to her organization and said, if you want me to stay, this is my new job. And her new organization said, that's awesome. We value you. We want you in the organization. And so she took the initiative to say, this is what I'm going to do. And another profile in the book, Elle Wolf, who's the CMO at Path Factory. You know, Elle, one of my favorite lines in the book, she closes with, life is short. I want to make sure I'm here for it. And so Elle had an opportunity to get a very high profile job with a great company. She decided for her family and for her own sake, she was going to take a role, which is still a great role with Path Factory, but it didn't pay as much, but it enabled her to live the life she wanted. So define what kind of life you want and then go design your career, your job, your business around that and what that looks like. And we talk about that as well in the book.
What's the best way to connect with you and to find out more about your book?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at CA Hidalgo, Hidalgo. I'm putting out a bunch of stuff there. You can also follow the UnAmerican Dream Facebook page if you're on Facebook. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, Carlos Hidalgo. I respond to every email unless it's a unrequested solicitation. And then the UnAmericanDream.com, where we're going to list all the information about the full release, any kind of pre-order. We post videos, articles. We'll be posting this podcast as well. So you can just go to the UnAmericanDream.com.
Fantastic. And for our listeners, we'll be including those links in our show notes. And Carlos, just thanks again for joining us and sharing your perspective. It's so needed.
Well, thanks, Brian. It's an honor to connect with you. And I want to thank you. I want your readers to know how much involvement you had with this project, because you saw some very early drafts, which I'm sure when you read those, you were like, okay. So, but you provided great feedback. And actually, you're the one who said, hey, why don't you have a couple of questions at the end of each chapter to include and to involve the reader? So I took that suggestion, and that's been well received as well. So thank you for your friendship, your support, and your involvement with this project.
Thanks, Carlos.